Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Monday, President's Day, 2019. Hope your Monday is going well. Let's take a look at quite a few things today. We're going to start off with the Southern Oscillation Index, the SOI. And boy, if this was a stock portfolio, that would be very bad, especially the 30-day really crashing here, indicating a change in the pressure pattern over the Southwest Pacific. The pressure difference between Darwin in Australia and Tahiti is enough so that there's lower pressure off to the east, and this is causing quite the crash in the Southern Oscillation Index, especially with the 30-day, and you can see that both on the graphical version and in the, I guess you'd call it the tabular version. Here are the different numbers. Boy, that daily contributor, minus 35. That's really getting down there. The 90-day still, because it's got a longer time period, just hanging on to this side of positive at 0.65. But it looks like that the index is going to go negative for the first time in a while on all counts, the 30-day and the 90-day. And that 30-day is getting close to what we would consider an El Nino threshold. And coincidentally, the Climate Prediction Center has issued the first El Nino advisory. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But the Southern Oscillation Index now indicating quite the drop overall, and that is indicative of more of an atmospheric state that would support El Nino. We just have to see how long it lasts, as my printer works in the background there. I don't know if you can hear that. I guess somebody's trying to send me something. All right, so looking at the overall, it's always some kind of noise around. Well, not always, but you just never know. It's random. So let's look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. This is the Mercator projection, where you take the globe and you flatten it out. This is what it would generally look like, and it's hard to take a round sphere and make it into a rectangle without things being distorted, but that's getting into geography and map making and all that stuff. But this is what it looks like, the Mercator shot of the Earth here. And you can see in the tropical Pacific, this is what we're talking about. A couple of interesting things, and I'm going to refer back to this probably more than once throughout the rest of this discussion here, at least until we get to the lower 48 part, where we go over the lower 48 weather, which is going to be active over the next few days. Like I said, lots to talk about today. But look through here along the equator. This is what we're interested in terms of the warm or cold ENSO event. ENSO, E-N-S-O, El Nino Southern Oscillation. And this area down here, let's draw it in red, a little bit warmer than the long-term average. It's not exceedingly so, where, 2015, that was a pretty phenomenal El Nino event. 1997, another one. This one is not so much. You've got this little cold area over here in the far eastern Pacific, a couple of colder patches, and this is relative to average, by the way. Blue is below average, and yellows and reds and oranges, etc., are above average. So overall, nothing that really jumps out as being significantly departing from the average, but nevertheless, Climate Prediction Center, CPC, indicating that we are in weak El Nino conditions. And then on the other side of the land masses over here in the Atlantic Basin, for what it's worth, Atlantic Basin, main development region, pretty warm compared to average. Most of the Atlantic Basin, the North Atlantic Basin, quite warm relative to average. A quarter of a degree, a half a degree, and in some cases up here in the Gulf Stream, up in the Northwest Atlantic, 4 or 5 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, which is where it's been for quite some time. We can zoom in and see this a little bit better. And boy, the Atlantic really jumps out, that everything except for just a few patches here and there, right at or above the long-term average. We'll see how long this lasts. If it persists into the hurricane season, it could be interesting and not in a good way, but we shall see. And a lot will have to do with what goes on in this area, the El Nino that is now officially declared. So let's look real quick at the subsurface. This is a snapshot of the subsurface, this most recent update, now about a week old. This came out on the 12th of February. And what this shows, we have the surface of the ocean at the top, and then 450 meters deep here at the bottom. This is the eastern part of the Pacific, and this is the West Pacific over here. See, about 100 degrees west all the way to 140 east. And so it covers quite a bit of distance, obviously, and this large blob of colder than normal anomalies kind of butting up against this huge area of subsurface warmth. And that's still fairly deep, below almost 100 meters deep there, a little bit, we'll call it 75 meters deep. And so the thing is, most of this warm water translates from west to east and then makes its way to the surface and warms the Pacific from underneath. It's this conveyor belt where, when you get these strong westerly wind bursts in the western Pacific, because normally the trade winds would blow from east to west like this, but sometimes you get the trade winds to relax or even reverse, and they come from this way. And then any warm water, which there's really not that much in the far western Pacific, as you can see, but it gets translated in what's called a downwelling Kelvin wave. And these are just all fancy ways, the scientific ways of explaining that these large pools of warm water can get driven from west to east over here and trigger this El Nino event when that rises to the surface, unless strong easterlies prevail over here that creates the flow of water away from the landmass, which is over here, would be South America, and you get this upwelling of water. And so you get this sort of turning, and it's a really slow but fascinating process that controls, to some extent, especially when there's a strong event, a strong warming or a strong cooling event, the global thermostat. Luckily, as we can see, this is not very strong on the positive side, or we would have some pretty big problems excuse me, globally, with large temperature swings and all kinds of problems that are associated with very strong El Ninos. And my phone is beeping. Hang on a moment. Shut that off. All right. Good old airplane mode. See, second interruption of today. Not going to start over because we're too deep into this. But the bottom line is, yeah, we're in El Nino, so let's go look at it. All right, so this is from the Climate Prediction Center, and they issued on Valentine's Day this very cute way of putting it together after several months of flirting, say yes, etc., etc. A cute way to present science, I guess, no problem with that. But what does it show? If we scroll through here, all kinds of information that over the last several months, overall, the area has been warming. What area? That's very important to look at. And let's highlight this. The Nino 3.4 region. What is that? Well, let's take a look. These are the regions right here. And it's kind of like looking at Venn diagrams. Remember that from math? And the ENSO regions, the El Nino Southern Oscillation Phenomenon regions, are broken up into 1 and 2, right off the coast of South America here, a fairly small area. And then you have Nino 3 that stretches over here, like this, pretty large area. Nino 4, all the way out past the date line into the far western Pacific. And then overlapping all of that is this important Nino 3.4 area, that overlapping Venn diagram kind of deal I was telling you about. And this is what the Climate Prediction Center is talking about, this region right through here that has warmed over the last several months to El Nino threshold levels. And that is above 0.5 degrees Celsius. Okay? There's the line there indicating it. So there it is. And it's very weak. All right? And it's leveled off too. It's not spiking and still climbing significantly or anything like that. So the long-term average, about 0.5 degrees Celsius above the long-term average. And when I say long-term, I'm talking about the last few months, and that is above the many, many years long-term average. And so they're declaring El Nino and all the different effects that could happen, etc. And this is all very detailed information. And you look at the different, I love all this. Be mine, call me. Again, this was Valentine's Day. The different models, indicating a pretty good spread here overall and what could happen. Generally speaking, this should stay weak and then eventually dwindle as the year progresses. Now, this is a cool diagram. I really, really like this because it shows you spatially where that subsurface warming is in relation to the map. And I'm going to go back to, as we depart this, and show you sort of this boring map here, the flat one. That other one was really cool, you got to admit. So the Nino 3.4 area stretches from 120 degrees latitude over to about 160 or so, something like that. It's roughly this area. Now look at that. It's not that warm compared to everything else. And let's see, I want to try to highlight this in blue. I mean, look through here. There's even some patches in there of slightly cooler. It's just not that warm. So I'm not convinced that we're really in an El Nino threshold. Weak, I mean, we're talking really weak. All right, this is like saying, well, you got a 99-degree fever. It's not really a fever. It is, but it isn't. Most people are, 98.6, so you got a 99.2 fever. Come on. That's not worth calling in sick to work for or school, right? I know the kids out there can be like, yeah, come on, man. 102 fever? Yeah, there you go. And if this was sitting at, 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5, it would really show up. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but this is critical to a lot of things that could happen down the road. And in this case, the weakness of the El Nino, the fact that it is weak overall, suggests, and we can just look right in here, that weak El Nino conditions mean that El Nino isn't dominating the global circulation. That is huge, absolutely huge. It is meaning that El Nino isn't dominating the global circulation. And there is a lower probability of El Nino-related global temperature and precipitation effects, okay? So this one right here, third time I'm going to mention it because it really is important. Because I've seen people tweeting, El Nino is here, that's great for the Atlantic hurricane season. Yeah, but it has to be a little stronger to be great for the Atlantic hurricane season to knock it down. A weak El Nino coupled with the fact that at least right now the main development region is warmer than average, this is a big negative. Who cares? This could dominate and we could see an active season if this pattern persists. It's context, folks. Context. You got to look at the bigger picture and not just those two words, El Nino, and people jumping on the Atlantic hurricane season won't amount to much. Well, I got to call BS on that because, first of all, nobody knows for sure. That's the simple way to put it. And secondly, the more complex way is to look at the bigger picture that we have just gone over. Yeah, there's weak El Nino conditions here, but look at this. And we really need to watch over, and the rest of the Atlantic too, nice and warm. Got to watch and see how this pans out because we are now approaching the 90-day mark until hurricane season begins, even though this area usually doesn't come into play until latter July. Well, sometimes it's been early July as of late. Beryl last year, even 2008, we had Bertha. And was that early July? I know it was in 1996. But the point is, yes, the Atlantic warmer than normal. We really got to watch this as we get closer to the start of the hurricane season. All right, so let's get rid of some of these different graphics here and move along and go to the lower. You know what? I do want to pull up one more thing that I forgot about. Hold on, bear with me. All right, here we do have the actual sea surface temperatures. I wanted to show you this because look, the 26-degree loop current, that's Celsius, still holding strong. It never got knocked down. This continues to fascinate me. It really won't have a difference in the hurricane season because the Gulf's always going to be warm. But boom, there it is. Maybe this would aid in early season development. Sometimes you get these Central American gyres that develop in late May, sometimes early May, but usually late May. And if this is running a little bit warmer than normal, well, you never know. So again, we're getting close to that 90-day mark until the season begins. that we have to start looking at things, and we can start looking at patterns. What's the upward motion pattern looking like? Seasonal forecasting about the whole thing. Somebody making a forecast early about how many named storms and where they might go. Very, very, very difficult. Subseasonal forecasting, even 30 to 60 days out for windows of opportunity for development, that's getting a lot better. And I'm actually highlighting some of that in my documentary this year, how well that was telegraphed last season when we saw the burst come that gave us Florence and eventually Michael, among other systems that luckily didn't affect land. But anyway, there you go. Gulf of Mexico. Hey, this is at least good for spring break, which is coming up. Shelf water will start to warm up a little bit more, still a little chilly, unless you go down here to the Florida Keys. All right, so let's get rid of this guy and move on to lower 48 weather. It's still winter. Yep, it's still winter, mid-February, getting towards late February. Desert Southwest, look at that. Freeze advisories, winter storm. Wow, Arizona, it's going to be 110 degrees there this summer, plus. And now it's almost every area in Arizona is under some kind of a winter weather advisory. Same thing with New Mexico here. Oh, it would be fantastic to be out there and see all this. You know, snow on the mountains and then the saguaro cactus on the desert floor. Must be incredible to see in person. So that's going to stay active with cold out west, stormy over here, mild in the southeast, and downright record-setting warm in Florida. In terms of nor'easters up here in New England and off the mid-Atlantic, forget about it, as they say. Doesn't look like it's happening. We still have March to get through, you never know, but the absence of the big nor'easter this year is noticed, especially by me. I was fully expecting to see one or two, but we haven't. The storms instead have been tracking across and then up like this, or even more to the north and west like that. We haven't seen them cutting across and then up past the benchmark and out to sea with big coastal effects and blizzard conditions along the I-95 corridor. Hadn't happened yet. We'll see. All right, some important things that I need you to pay attention to, especially if you live in the yellow and the red areas here. Flooding. Too much rain, too short a period of time can lead to major problems. We look at rain as being a refreshing, cleansing element. It refreshes the rivers, it refreshes our souls, etc. Songs have been made about it, you name it. But too much rain can cause misery, death, and destruction. Too much of anything will do that, obviously, but this is very serious, and we're looking at a moderate threat here in parts of Arkansas, western Tennessee, northwest Alabama, Mississippi. You know, really, you've got to pay attention to this. Flash flooding, streams, creeks, rivers coming out of their banks, roads getting crossed with culverts that give way. You must be careful. Pay attention. Look on social media to your National Weather Service office in that area or your favorite local TV meteorologist. They're going to give you the most up-to-date info because this could be a life-threatening situation. For real. We look at tornadoes, we look at hurricanes as big-time threats, and we fear them, rightfully so. But I think we tend to look at rain as, it's just raining. Well, trust me, and people who went through Harvey, who went through Florence and other big flood events, you know. So be careful. It's coming, and it's going to last for a few days, so be ready for it. Also, for the first time this year, the severe weather threat rearing its head. Just general thunderstorms over. I really like this panel, by the way, over the next several days. This is fantastic. The graphical way to display information to people is just getting better and better. So for the first couple of days, including today, just marginal, you know, no big deal. But several days down the road, by days 5, 6, etc., the indicators are starting to suggest somewhere in parts of the deep south there, Arkansas, the areas, you know, northern Louisiana, up through the Tennessee Valley, maybe into Indiana. Several days out, this is Saturday we're talking about, the potential for severe weather. This will become more focused, more enhanced over time as more information and model data becomes available. But just be ready because we're getting closer to severe weather season as well. And what we may not get for nor'easters up here in the winter, we might make up for on the Great Plains and elsewhere. We'll just have to wait and see. We're getting to that time of year. I'm a little curious to see because, we've had all these storms coming in from the west, and then they dive into the Midwest and cut up like this. That could set up an interesting scenario for Tornado Alley. We'll just have to see. I'm not as nearly seasoned in that department. I'll rely on other people as time goes on. All right, just real quick, a glance at the GFS here. I did this GIF animation from Tropical Tidbits, and you can see that heavy rain there coming out at about 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours, down in parts of the deep south, and then the severe weather threat coming up. You see those bright thunderstorm tops there. Well, at least the radar reflectivity would be. This is precipitation. The loop will start over here in just a moment. There's the heavy rain, again at about 48 to 60 hours or so. Then, as we approach the weekend, this pretty strong low, there it goes, and right out in front of it, in parts of, again, the deep south, maybe some big problems. And it's really interesting to see these storms coming out of this region one after another, and that's going to be Tornado Alley. Well, it is now. I'm just saying it could be an active Tornado Alley once we get into April and May, especially. Something to pay attention to. That's part of what I like to do. I want to make sure you're paying attention with all the distractions going on in the geopolitical state, in our lives, the home front, the work front. Now you got to make sure, pun intended, you pay attention to the weather front. Hey, that was a good pun, you got to admit. And that's part of what I do. We're not just about hurricanes. It's about overall awareness and preparedness and just being mindful of what's out there. So we covered a lot today. You got any questions or comments or want to add to the conversation, please do so. And the YouTube comments on Patreon, if you're one of our patrons, the feedback there is always great. And elsewhere, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. I've got most of it. Not Snapchat, not Instagram, just don't have time for that. But anyway, I appreciate you tuning in. We did go over a lot today, and there's a lot to keep track of as things start to get a little bit active again in the weather department, even though it's not hurricane season. That's why it's the off-season outlook and discussion. I am Mark Sudduth. Thank you again for tuning in on your side of the screen. I'll be back with more for you next week.